4. My knees tremble, my loins yield, my heart panteth, and all my limbs are seized with shaking and trembling, as though I had been seized by the hair of my head and borne aloft. I know not who standeth before me, who goeth before me, and whose footsteps I follow. My rabbi is more than a rabbi. He is that which I do not understand. I know not from what sources he draweth his strength, and what permission he hath received. Who is he? Do I stand nigh unto the Holy One of Israel? Woe is me! I am a man of unclean lips and evil heart. When my rabbi went forth from the house of Simon the Pharisee, and from the presence of the learned men who sat there, I and the other disciples went with him. And when we had passed by the many guards and servants and reached the gate, we beheld a great assembly of people, and they held in their hands kindled oil lamps, and Simon Bar-Jonah, the disciple, was with them, and likewise Jacob and Johanan, the Zebedees. And the three of them were of one mind. They had conspired among themselves to conceal from the other disciples a certain thing. And Simon Bar-Jonah drew near to the rabbi, and the people lifted up their lamps that they might shine on the face of the rabbi and on his white garment in the night. And they cried to him, Rabbi, Hosanna, help us. And Simon Bar-Jonah said, Teacher, have compassion on the people of this city, Naim. They have come forth to thee with kindled lamps, and they long to see thy countenance, and to rejoice in thee, to drink the waters of thy source, and to be healed by thee. And Jacob of the Zebedees and his brother Johanan implored with Simon, for they were all of one mind. And Jacob said, Rabbi, the learned men believe not in thee, and they seek speech with thee concerning the Torah, only that they may make a show of their learning. But the people love thee and believe in thee. And hast thou not said, Blessed are the humble? And they come to thee, humble in spirit, and they bring thee the love of their hearts. Go with them, for thy place is among them. And his brother Johanan also spoke with persuasion to the rabbi, and said, Thou drawest unto thyself those of a broken heart. Come with us, Rabbi, to the house of Johanan the tax collector. He hath cleansed his house to receive thee, and he would assemble the people under one roof, that they may rejoice in thee. But I inclined myself to the ear of my rabbi, and said, Now, when the learned will see that thou didst forsake their house, and art gone unto the sinners, and hast changed the table of the learned for the table of a tax collector, they will be greatly offended, and they will bring thy evil report before the elders of Israel. And my rabbi answered, Judah, men do not light a candle and hide it under a bushel, but they place it on high, that all may see it. And the tax collector, being there, bowed himself before the rabbi, and said, Come, thou blessed of God, under my roof, that it may be blessed for thy sake. And he lit the way for my rabbi with his lamp. And Simon Bar-Jonah was near him, and Jacob and Johanan, and the people with lamps and torches in their hands conducted our rabbi through the streets of the city Naim to the house of the tax collector. Now Johanan the tax collector was a rich man, and his house was large and could receive many people. And many were assembled there, both rich and poor. And Cusa, the officer of Herod, was also there with his wife Jochannah, and with a certain woman whose name was Susanna, and they were of the rich women of the city. And the woman whose name was Miriam of Migdal, and who had washed and anointed the feet of the rabbi in the house of the Pharisee, had followed after the rabbi. And as the rabbi entered the house of the tax collector, the people encircled him and obstructed his steps. For the sick threw themselves down before him, And there were blind folk who felt with their hands and sought to touch his garment, and those that were possessed with spirits called to him for help, and the sinners bowed their heads before him and sank to the ground, and others concealed their faces in their hands for shame, for they were afraid to look into his face, lest he know the sins which were written on their foreheads, and corrupted in them the image of God. And many stretched out their hands to him in great longing, and they cried, "Rabbi, help us!" And when our rabbi saw so much faith about him, then he was filled with might, and his face became like a burning fire, and his hands also. And it was as though we beheld the sparks that issued from his face and his beard, and his eyes sparkled like amber, as if the heavens had opened in them, and we beheld the depths of the heavenly light. And his garment, which was white, gave out blinding rays, as if it were all of fire. And when the people saw the light which beat from the rabbi's face, and his skin and his hair, and the light of his garment, they were seized with a great trembling, and they drew back for fear. And they made a circle about him, and he stood in the midst of the circle like a burning light. But there was one woman who dared to come forth from the press and enter the circle. Her limbs gave way under her, and her face was pale, and her eyes as though they were blind, and she bent to the earth and touched the hem of his robe. And the rabbi trembled as though fire had touched fire. And he looked around and asked, "Who hath touched my garment? For I felt that power went out of her." And when he beheld the woman who lay with her face to the earth before him, and trembled like the last leaf on the tree in the days of rain, he raised her up and said, "Go, thy faith hath saved thee." And after her there were others that dared come into the fiery circle of the rabbi. And one blind man came, and with hands stretched out before him, entered the fire, and knew not whither he went. And when the blind man felt the rabbi's hand, he leaped as if he had touched a burning fire, and he cried out, "A fire hath burned me. Surely I must have touched the rabbi's hand." And the woman that came from Migdal stretched herself at his feet in all her length. Like the strings that are stretched upon a harp, she lay stretched on the floor. And for a while she lay still. But soon the spirits that were in her belly began to stir, and they flung her about as the wind flingeth about the sea. And she threw herself hither and thither, as though the spirits would go forth from her body, and could not. Then the spirits seized her and lifted her up, and she began to turn with her hands and her hair, as the wind maketh the cypress in the field to turn, and she sought herself. And the foam came upon her lips, and her eyes were large and like flames, and her hair was like fiery tongues which darted about her. And voices and lamentings began to issue from her. And at first it was like the crying of a child, which singeth and entreateth without words. But the voices changed into a wailing, and she stretched forth her hands as if she saw someone before her, and she began to sing from the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, "Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness?" And she went as if to encounter one, with dancing steps and a purified countenance, as if she beheld him that was destined unto her. And then she became afraid, and she trembled and fluttered in all her body, and bent herself in three. And she began to weep, saying that her sins had suckled evil spirits in her belly, and now they bind her with ropes, and say that she belongeth to them, and they will not let her approach him. And like one that falleth into the nethermost pit, and is surrounded by snakes and scorpions which torment his soul, so she implored the rabbi, and stretched forth her hands to him, "Save me, thou chosen one, from the torments which dwell in my body. Thou art my only help." And she fell, and concealed her face in her hands, and wept long and bitterly. And the rabbi placed his hands on her head, saying, "Clean, clean, clean art thou." And he commanded the demons and spirits to leave her, for her sins had been forgiven. And he took her by the hand and lifted her up from her place, and said to us, "She is our sister," and sat her down at his feet. But she stretched herself out on the floor in all her length, and she covered the rabbi's feet with her face and hair, and she lay still like a newborn child at his feet. And when the people saw the miracles which our rabbi wrought with the sick and the heavy laden, they stretched forth their hands to him and entreated, "Rabbi, teach us what we shall do, that we may be saved and inherit the kingdom of heaven." And our rabbi stretched out his hands to them and said, "Ye shall attain to the kingdom of heaven only with the yoke which ye take upon you, for the time is near. Salvation knocketh at the gate, and those that are prepared, they shall enter by the gate, but the others will remain outside." "But what shall we do, Rabbi?" "Give up the earthly riches which ye have gathered, for only they that entrust themselves to their Father in heaven, and not to the superfluity of bread which they have concealed in hidden places, can inherit the kingdom of heaven. If one of you have 2 loaves, he shall give one to his brother. And if one of you have 2 garments, he shall give one to his brother. For narrow is the gate into the kingdom of heaven, and only the naked and hungry can enter thereby. Ye cannot serve God and mammon, and he that would follow me, he shall first throw off himself his earthly riches, and put his faith in his Father in heaven, and not in his money."